John Kerry, whose alternative was, I can do the same thing Bush is doing, but I can do it better and more efficiently than him, so vote for me. Yeah, vote for me, I'll set you free. Tweedledee, tweedledum. So it occurred to me, Palestinians probably were sending some ghosts along. See, there were those 500,000 Iraqi children. Well, actually, the UN report said 565,000 by that point. Now note, when the food for oil program began, whatever corruption was involved, that mortality rate went down dramatically. Whatever that thug that headed the Ba'athist Party may have done, he didn't starve his own children to death. The onus of that's right here. And there are about 500,000 adults that might have joined that queue on those aircraft as well. So add them to the list of chickens. And then add the Palestinians, all of them, over the last 2 generations, dispersed from, displaced from their homeland, compliments of U.S. taxpayers, and cooped up in refugee camps when they're not being attacked wholesale, living that life generation in, generation out, with no end in sight. There might be a little irritation there. There might be a little holdover irritation from some Panamanians whose country was invaded, lock, stock, and barrel. Regime change imposed in the name of the United States serving a drug warrant on the nominal head of state. And there were a couple slit trenches full of bodies that were not supposed to have been accumulated as casualties, according to the Pentagon, during the fighting, were found afterwards. They're still living with that. Maybe they're irritated. Maybe they're irritated in some other places in Central America from, that funny little Contra war that was waged down there illegally even under U.S. law by the Reagan administration, piling up corpses. And remember the famous white paper about El Salvador, while they were funding death squads and perpetrating wholesale massacres? Yeah. There might even be some Mayans who have come up here a little disgruntled by the fact that you had a duly elected democratic government in a place called Guatemala that was overthrown by the CIA in 1954, with the result that about 230,000 Mayan Indians have ended up getting slaughtered since, in order to pave the way for the opening up of their traditional homelands to make industrial parks for the greater glory of U.S. corporate profit. And the whole thing was undertaken back in '54 to guarantee the stability of the use of Guatemalan farmland for the profitability of United Fruit. And then there's something about the overthrow and the installation of the duly elected government in Iran, compliments of Kermit Roosevelt. And there's a whole bunch of people that end up dead in Iran as a result of that, compliments of U.S. taxpayers once again, and the operations of SAVAK to prevent them from having the government of their choice. But perhaps we've gone too far, because in between those 2 points I was just talking about, the Contra War in Nicaragua and the stuff that was happening in 1953 in Iran and 1954 in Guatemala, you had about 3.2 million, and that's according to Defense Secretary McNamara in his memoirs, that about 3.2 million Indo-Chinese, in order to prevent those folks from electing Ho Chi Minh, which the Eisenhower government had a political study that said if we actually hold the election, we are committed to honor, according to the Geneva Accords in that country. Ho Chi Minh is the only possible winner. He would be elected. You can't allow them to elect somebody that we don't like, and therefore, in order to keep them free, you understand. Yeah, well, I was involved in that one, and that was the one I'm going to spend the rest of my life living down, I would suppose. I got some karma to pay there, too, using that term again. But maybe there's a few people my age who are on the receiving end of that exercise in free world dynamics, who have not quite gotten over what it was that was done to their country, and still being done, because a lot of the stuff, cluster bombs and so forth, are still detonating and taking children's feet off and farmers' feet off in the rice paddies over there, and you've still got buried defoliants that are being brought to the surface, which are both carcinogenic, mutagenic, and all manner of other ecocidal environmental devastation that has effects on flora, fauna, including the human population. And this is 35 years after the fact. They're still paying the costs and the consequences. The United States did not even pay the reparations, paltry as they were, that they agreed to in order to be able to achieve what Richard Nixon called peace with honor. Thought maybe it had something to do with 500,000 to 1 million Indonesians that while Vietnam was going on ended up getting slaughtered in order to take Sukarno out and put Suharto in. Suharto, the guy who just left Indonesia 3 years ago with about $20 billion of his impoverished people's aid money in his back pocket and is being protected by the United States. Still. And then that places the onus of East Timor and the slaughter of a third of the population there to maintain the stability of the Suharto regime in its late phases. Maybe those ghosts were involved. And then we could go back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we should stop in Korea along the way and pay heed and homage to Nogan-ri and the other massacres that were perpetrated by U.S. forces there in order to maintain a partition line in somebody else's country in the name of freedom. Once again, the United States cutting somebody's country in half and saying, people don't agree with us, I have to stay north, and we're going to have the free world in the south whether you like it or not. And if you don't like it, we'll kill you, which they did. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 200,000 odd people incinerated in targets that had not been hit. Those cities were selected because they were relatively undamaged and overwhelmingly civilian in their utilization. Okay, these were a demonstration to Joe Stalin by Harry Truman, prefiguring George Bush's 1991 statement. This one's in 1945. Joe, we got weapons that you can't match in the post-war world, so you got to get the message. What we say goes. It wasn't about ending the war. They've been trying to end the war for 6 months. That had to do with the post-war order. 200,000 people were the form of the message sent. What's that great term that was invented on the 11th of September 2001? You didn't find it in the dictionary until then. Innocent American, that's all one word. Innocent American, if you're American by definition, you're innocent. Well, here's some samples of American innocence coming at you here. Because these are not evil demons lurking in the high quarters of empire or the back rooms of corporate America. This is getting done by your average on-the-ground American from Illinois like me. Nothing special and nothing innocent. Innocence and America are a contradiction in terms, oxymoronic. But they fused the two. You couldn't say American without innocent for 6 months after 9/11. And these were the least innocent of the lot. I'll come back to that too. Because of nuclear bombings, oh yeah, we're in Iraq now because they were really worried that there was WMD, which wasn't there. Worried about WMD in the country with the largest stockpiles of every known type of WMD in violation of every conceivable treaty. They're destroying the chemical weapons we never had now. Down in Skull Valley. Largest inventories on the planet. Could have killed an entire continental population with stuff the United States insisted it didn't have, and they're worried about what it was that the Ba'athis in Iraq might have made, given equipment and techniques by the United States to use as a counter against the Iranians at a certain point when Saddam was our friend. That was when he gassed the Kurds, you know. Nobody said a word about it when he did it. And he couldn't have done it without U.S. technical expertise and the provision of proscribed materials. That's reasonably well documented. Do an Amazon search on that very thing, a couple keywords, okay? You get the documents. They're U.S. documents. Of course, CIA must have been wrong with it, but in their reports for the 1980s because they became very inconvenient in the 1990s. And you know, after all, how incompetent they are. You want to hang your entire security hat on them. For the nuclear bombings, and those nuclear bombings represent the only time any country has ever used nuclear weapons against another country. You're in it. It's not some evil empire out there. This is the one that's used the weapons of mass destruction on civilian targets.